Okay, why don't we get started? We might have a few stragglers that join us a little bit later, but my name's John Kamen, one of the co-founders of Wholesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to join today. I checked the registration list. Looks like we had about 30 to 35 people registered from a few different industries. A lot of rafting outfitters joined us, a few universities and other school groups, and a few camps and sort of bed and breakfast types from what I can tell. So we've got a pretty diverse set of folks on the call today or planning to review this when it's recorded, but mostly from the outdoor sector. So we'll try to kind of cater to that world as much as we can. Again, thanks for joining. I have a quick agenda. Can you all in the chat window just message me if you can't see my screen currently or hear me? Everything working okay? All good? No. Thumbs up? Great. So I thought I'd run through a very quick overview of what we're going to cover today, and then we can dive right into the platform. The first thing I wanted to do, and if we're going to take a kind of a different twist on this than we have in the past, is I wanted to share two things with you up front that hopefully will stick with you regardless of whether you choose to use Wholesome right away or not. One of them in particular that should be valuable to everyone, whether you use Wholesome or not, and then one that's just a discount code that I wanted to get out in front of you right away in case you have to jump off sometime over the coming 45 minutes or an hour. So I'll jump into that real fast. I'll do a quick introduction to Wholesome and how it works. For those that are up for it, I'm going to dive in a little bit deeper to deal with some of the tips and tricks and features related to Wholesome, particularly dealing with dietary restrictions. That's one of the sticking points that a lot of people turn to Wholesome to help solve. And then we'll wrap up and have time for some conversation and questions, talk about options moving forward. I'll also stop after that introduction to Wholesome for some questions as well, so we can make sure that I didn't go through it too fast, or if we need to review anything or dive in. At any point, you're welcome to ask a question in the chat. And Grace is with me. She's gonna try to help corral some of those questions to make sure that they don't get lost in the mix. And then there's I'll try to make time both in the middle and at the end where you're welcome to either type a question in the chat or unmute to join. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my. Well, I'll jump to the next slide, I guess. One of the two things I wanted to share before I stop sharing is this. You're welcome to write this down if you want to. I'm also recording this webinar, and we'll send it out to everyone that registered. I wanted to extend, particularly during this time of the year, I know it's a time when people are sort of gearing up for a summer season and trying to figure out what the right tool is for them to solve a given problem. And if you're considering Wholesome, I wanted to thank you for joining the webinar by giving this code. It will give you, if you subscribe by the end of this month, it will give you the first 2 months, so April and May, for free. You won't have any charges or anything like that until June, and you can cancel at that time if you're not happy with it. To use it, there's the code 2FREE2021. It'll expire at the end of this month. You'll want to sign up for a trial first and apply that in settings. So if it's something you're considering and you're a new subscriber, you're welcome to give that a try so that you can have an extended setup time to see if it's going to be a good fit for you. And then the second thing that I wanted to share off the bat is I'll stop my screen share here quickly and share a different screen here. So you all should be able to see my browser now, and I wanted to share something that's new this past year. We worked really hard with a few of our longtime users to create a list of recipes that you all are welcome to see. So I'm going to browse down to the bottom of Wholesome here. This is a tool and a resource that's available whether you're a subscriber to Wholesome or not. So if you're in a place where you don't yet have your recipes and meal plans dialed in, all of these companies on the right are companies that were kind enough to offer up their entire menu plan, their entire menu to the public to just see what they're using and how they're planning their meals, and how they're feeding their clients and getting out there. So at any time, whether you're a Wholesome user or not, you can come to Wholesome, scroll to the bottom and there's this recipe collections. If you are a user, it'll be pretty front and center when you're in there, and you can borrow those recipes to use them as your own. So I wanted to make sure I got that out there for anybody who decides you have to move on. I know we all have busy lives. So with that, I will jump into that second bullet, which is an introduction to Wholesome. So my hope here is that I'm going to spend just a few minutes giving you a quick overview of how Wholesome works, show you kind of the finished product of what you'll expect for your groups, and then we can stop and chat about it briefly. We tried to build Wholesome in a way, we've been working on this for about 5 or 6 years now, and each year we've worked to try to add different components and solve a problem for a different industry. And with that has come some additional features, and each one of those features is sort of an optional add-on, so that you can choose to use Wholesome in its simplest form. That's really easy and should be easy to set up and use, or you can add on these additional features, which gives you a little bit more power, a little bit more precision, but it also comes with a little bit more learning, a little bit more complexity. And so I wanted to first start with the most simple version to introduce you to how it works, and then we'll have time in a few minutes to kind of dive into some of those sort of additional features when we have time. So I will log into a dummy account that I use for testing purposes to give you a sense of how Wholesome works as a whole. And you'll see this is the dashboard when we come in. We've got the recipes that we use, the ingredients that we use within those recipes, and the meal plans that we use with groups. What I want to do, the process here is to start with recipes and work through ingredients, and then ultimately work with your meal plans. But just to give you a sense of where we're going, I was hoping to actually just jump straight into meal plans and show you what it looks like, show you what it feels like, and then we'll back up a little bit and talk about recipes and ingredients. But that way you kind of know where this is all heading, and then we'll talk about how to get there. So with that, I'm going to look at my meal plans. On the right, we see a list of some meal plans I've used over the past many months, some folders that I use on the left to keep them organized, and I am going to start a new meal plan. So we'll call this webinar meal plan test group. And we start by saying in this group, so this is a discrete group of people that are coming to use your services or visit your camp or go out on a rafting trip. We define the number of individuals in that group, and you can do that by appetite size if you'd like. I'm going to say we've got 22 people on this group. We can specify what dietary restrictions are present in that group. That is, some member of the group isn't able to eat these ingredients. We'll dig in a lot more into this. There's more complicated and powerful versions of this that we can talk about. And then what we'll do is we'll build our meal plan. And so on the right here, we have a planning grid: breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a snack, and the 4-day group that we're planning for. And on the left are all of the recipes that we have either built or imported to build out our meal plan. And so we can just drag and drop these over. You'll see the flag that indicates that it's got a possible conflict in there, but we can ignore that for now. I'll add a few more just to give you a sense of how this works. These can all be filtered to say, let's get rid of things that don't have eggs, or just show me breakfast meals, and we'll throw all of that in there. We can do multiples in here if we want to. So we'll call that our meal plan. Obviously, we could spend more time building this out and get all the different meals in there. And I'm going to click Save Meal Plan and Create Shopping List. And this is kind of the final output. What we've got is a few ways to view this. You can look at it on the web. There's a spreadsheet we can download, or a PDF that we can look at. I usually start with the PDF just to give us a sense of what that looks like. And it shows up in a few ways. I hope you can all see this. We've got the shopping list. So this is all of the ingredients that are in those recipes that we built, and they're going to be scaled up to the group size and the appetite size of the group that you've got. So in our case, this is for 22 individuals, and this is what we need to bring. You can see that it will aggregate across different meals. So we've got sandwiches, build your own sandwiches, peanut butter and jelly, and French toast. That will require around 8 loaves of bread. We'll get a printout of the meal plan itself. And then we'll also have scaled up recipes with, if you added them, with instructions and the ingredients needed for those, for that specific recipe. So I flew through that pretty fast, but that is essentially the final product, the meal plan. This is where you'll spend most of your time planning for groups. But I did want to back up a little bit, go back to this dashboard and give you a general sense of how we got there, so that a few of the precursor steps that we need to take before we're ready to just jump right into the meal plans. So let me do that by coming back here and say, let's jump into the recipes and ingredients just to get a sense of what those look like as well. So if I come here and look at recipes, what we've got here is a list of all of the recipes that I've created already. When you start your account, this will be a blank slate. So you get to decide what recipes it is that you're going to serve your groups. You can create recipes from scratch. You can import them from allrecipes.com if you're careful about ingredient management. And you can also import recipes from that collection that I shared with you at the beginning that other organizations are using on their trips or their groups. So to give you a sense of how this works, I'm going to just start by creating a new recipe, and I'll go pretty fast here. Looks like I've done this one before, bagels and cream cheese. And we're going to say this is a recipe for 10 people. And the idea here is that we're building a recipe for a fixed number of people so that we can pick the right ingredients for that number of people. But this will scale up and scale down later. So it doesn't particularly matter if you think about your recipes in per person quantities. We can certainly just build this for one person. And if you bring a group of 20 people out, it will multiply the ingredients by 20 and so forth. So whatever is easiest for you to think about it, as long as the ingredient quantities here match the individual quantities. Let me just check quickly to make sure there's nobody waiting in the waiting room. Okay, we're all good. Great. So I'm going to start here and say 10 whole bagels. And you'll notice as I start writing this, it'll look for ingredients that are in other recipes that match so that we can keep consistent here. I'll skip the store and the cost for now. And we'll say 1 tub of cream cheese. You'll see a lot of different units here. Weight by volume, or sort of by package or piece up at the top. We'll say 1 tub of cream cheese. And I'll define this information later, the store and the cost. We can decide what, we can identify what dietary restrictions are present in that group to help notify the planner and help plan around possible dietary restrictions. And then if it's helpful, we can add instructions for how to make this recipe as well, so that when we send it out to the people that will be cooking, they can have a step-by-step guide along the way. We'll say it's breakfast, and we'll move on from there. So that's essentially a very simple and quick version of how you build the recipes. Similarly, there's these options where you can import existing ones, as I mentioned. So that's a summary of the recipes. As we build that recipe list, so we'll go through and build the 20, 30, 40 recipes that you might use across all of your groups. And as we do that, it's going to build this list of all of the ingredients in all of the recipes. And this is something of an optional step. This is a place for you to define a little bit more detail if you want to. So the idea here is if we want to record some notes about that ingredient, in this case I wrote buy organic, or you can have a note about where you want to store it. It's just a note for the purchaser or for the packer to say, here's something to note about this ingredient in particular. What brand do you want to buy, or avoid the onion bagels, or whatever it is that's helpful. And this will flow through to the shopping list and the packing list as you get ready. It'll show you what meals it's in, and then this is where you can define what store or what vendor you typically use to purchase this. And the idea here, and similarly you can define the department if it's a bread or a frozen good or whatever you have here. And the idea here is that the final shopping list will be sortable or reportable by the store and by the department, so that you can say, I'm going to Costco and I just need to see the ingredients that I typically purchase at Costco. I want them sorted by the department so I can shop really quickly. So that's the advantage of spending the time to add these things. You can also add cost details if you're trying to keep track of some estimates of per person cost or per recipe cost. And we can say we buy it by the dozen and we spend $3.50 on this, and this will flow through to the shopping list and flow through to the recipe as well. So that's the ingredient planning. So again, we build out our recipes, define the ingredients in each of those recipes, we come into the ingredient section, add the details that we want to keep track of, and then again we come back to our webinar or our meal planning section here, jump in, define the number of people, pick the meals that we're going to use, and then our output is pretty straightforward. So that is, I know I flew through that really fast, but I wanted to kind of quick get it all out there so that you understood sort of the general framework for how Wholesome works. And take a moment to pause, take a few questions if we've got any, and then we can jump into some of the more advanced features about like automatic dietary substitution, aggregating meal plans, those sorts of things that we can get into in a little bit more detail. But why don't we take a moment to pause real fast. Is there anything that I ran through too quickly, anything that you didn't understand, anything that would be helpful to go through again? And you can unmute and ask the question, or you can type it into the chat box, whatever makes sense for you. Looks like we're doing good so far. Let me just see if I can find my chat window here, make sure we're good. No questions so far. Okay, no sweat, last call. Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay, so the next thing that was on our list here was to jump into, as I mentioned, some of the more advanced features. And the first one that always comes to mind in terms of how can we use Wholesome most effectively is questions about dietary restrictions. And I know that pretty much anybody these days that's in the business of serving food to clients is wrestling with this issue constantly. And there's a few ways that we can tackle it, and I wanted to talk through a few of those options with you. So the way I typically think about this is that there's sort of three different ways that we can accommodate dietary restrictions, generally speaking. And each company, each organization, each cook has a different way of dealing with it, and you may choose a combination of these three. And those three that stand out to me are, one, sort of a lowest common denominator approach, where we say, okay, we've got somebody who's gluten-free on this group, the whole group is eating gluten-free. We're not serving any wheat. Or we've got a peanut allergy on this trip. We're not serving peanuts to anybody on this trip. We're just eliminating it completely. And so what you're serving to is sort of the lowest common denominator of what all individuals in that group can eat. So that's one general strategy. Another strategy is a meal substitution. So an example of this would be like, we're going to serve spaghetti and meatballs for dinner, but if you are gluten-free, we've got this other meal for you, this rice and beans meal. We're cooking a completely separate meal. Or if you're a vegetarian, we've got this vegetarian meal that is completely separate, and we're going to cook it separately. So that's the second option. And the third option is probably the most common one, which is an ingredient substitution. So rather than substituting the whole meal and saying, instead of spaghetti and meatballs, you're going to have rice and beans, we substitute ingredients. And we say, okay, if you're gluten-free, we just need to make sure we bring some gluten-free pasta. And everybody's going to eat pasta tonight. We're just going to have this one ingredient that we substitute for. The sauce is the same, or the meat is the same, or whatever else. And if there's a vegetarian person, we substitute for that meat with something else. And so that's ingredient substitution. And there are ways using Wholesome to tackle each of those three, whichever one you choose to use in any given case. So I'll walk through each one of them directly. And I'll start with that third option. So let's start with this ingredient substitution. So this, again, is where we're serving everybody the same meal, but we're substituting ingredients. or it's a buffet style meal where people are pulling together their own ingredients, and you just want to make sure you bring the right quantity of substitutes for that buffet. So let's talk about that really fast. When we jump into some of the more advanced features of Wholesome, you can always find them here in settings. So this is kind of the list of the settings that you might adjust in Wholesome to make it more powerful for you. And the one I'm talking about here is the substitute ingredients. So I'm going to turn that on. And what that does is I'll jump back to my recipes, and here's that bagels and cream cheese recipe that I made earlier. What you'll see now that I've turned that on is this substitute column. And at the recipe level, what we're going to do is define substitutes for those ingredients that might need substitutes. So in the case of bagels, I will jump in here and say, for individuals that have the following dietary restrictions, wheat or gluten, we will replace 10 whole bagels with 10 whole gluten-free bagels. Okay, and the substitute is defined there. Similarly with cream cheese, we can say, okay, if somebody has a dairy allergy, we will substitute 1 tub of cream cheese for 1 jar of peanut butter. Great. So that is, the substitutes for that recipe are defined. And that's one change you'll see. So you'll go through and add those substitutes. And then when we come back to make a meal plan, if I were to edit this existing one that we were working on before, instead of just check boxes here, what you'll see is that we have sliders. And so now instead of just indicating, hey, somebody's got a wheat or gluten allergy, we can indicate the number of people. So let's say we've got 5 out of those 22 that have a wheat or gluten allergy, and we've got 4 that have a dairy allergy. And now if I add this bagels and cream cheese in as a breakfast option, what we should see when we come to find the final shopping list is that we've got 5 gluten-free bagels, and we've got 1.8 tubs of cream cheese, and the peanut butter has been scaled up as well, a little bit hard to tell because it's wrapped up in all of these recipes. And similarly, if we jump down to the bagels and cream cheese, we'll see 17 whole bagels for the 17 people that can have them, 5 for the gluten-free that can't, 1.8 tubs of cream cheese, and about half a jar of peanut butter. So that's the substitution that we can see. So it takes a little bit of time to go through all those recipes and make sure you define substitutes where they're appropriate. But once you do that, the menu planning can be so much faster because all you have to do is indicate the number of dietary restrictions on the group, and the recipes will scale up and scale down appropriately and substitute as need be. So that's sort of option 3 that I mentioned of how to deal with dietary restrictions. Let me back up quickly to option 2, which again was meal replacement. So instead of replacing bagels and cream cheese ingredients, we're going to replace the entire meal. So instead of bagels and cream cheese, we're going to serve oatmeal to those that can't have bagels and cream cheese. And the way we would do that, should you choose that to be the best option, is if we've got bagels and cream cheese in here, or maybe we can do a different example here. We can say, we can do the one that I outlined here, spaghetti and meatballs for dinner. And it's going to assume from the beginning that everybody on the group is going to eat spaghetti and meatballs. But what we're going to do here is actually add, let's add polenta and red sauce as the alternative meal. And one section here that I kind of breezed by is this summary of the meal plan. And by default, everybody, all 22 individuals, will be eating each one of these meals. But if for some reason you want to decrease that, maybe somebody's joining the group late, or maybe somebody's leaving early, or in this case, we want to do a substitute, we can say, okay, 5 people are going to have that and 17 are going to have this. So what we've done now is scaled back those specific recipes so that we're not bringing ingredients for all 22. We've just scaled it back to the appropriate size. And this is a good tool if you choose that second option, that recipe substitution tool. So I hope that makes sense as 2 ways that you can deal with dietary restrictions using Wholesome. And then the third one is far less common, where you would serve to the common denominator and just eliminate meals that have any potential allergens in there. But should you decide to do that, this recipe filter on the left works, so we can get rid of meals that contain wheat or gluten, get rid of meals that contain dairy, and then we'll just end up with those ones on the left that meet the criteria. And then you can just basically do your meal plan based off of that. So that can be a really helpful way to do it as well. So again, that was a pretty quick summary of it all, but I wanted to make sure that you were familiar with those three strategies: the common denominator, the meal substitution, or the ingredient substitution. Is this a good place to stop? Can we take some questions here? Looks like Hillary has a question. Are we able to set the types of restrictions? For example, if we want to substitute for paleo or keto, would we be able to create that restriction? I think I understand your question. One, let me jump back to the settings to see if this answers it. So if I'm in settings here, there's this section called dietary restrictions, and this is where we can define the restrictions. This is a little bit maybe opposite of what you're asking. So your paleo and keto are sort of defining what they do eat, and the dietary restrictions sort of reflecting what they don't eat. But you can definitely adjust the list of dietary restrictions to add as many or remove as many as you'd like. It'll come preloaded with this list of the most common dietary restrictions, but you can add or adjust these. If you want to think about meals as keto or paleo or vegan or this kind of lump category of dietary restrictions, what some organizations have used is a trick that is tagging recipes. So I breezed past this a little bit, but within each recipe, we can add custom tags. So in this case, we can say it's gluten-free. This is where you could write that it's keto or paleo, and sort of flag that recipe as meeting some criteria that you find important. And that could be dietary restriction. It also could be logistics, like if it's a backcountry trip or a front country trip, or if it's a quick and easy one or one with no heat required. These are all ways that you can sort of flag recipes as meeting certain criteria. And then in the meal plan itself, you can filter that list on the left by those tags. So we can say, just show me the gluten-free ones. In this case, I just had the one flagged that way.
I'm on that.
That works.
That the webinar that you put me on.
I'll mute Steve in there. Sorry about that. Okay. What other questions do we have out there? Feel free to type them or unmute your microphone and ask them if you've got them. Otherwise, I can keep cruising. Yeah, let's take a look at the Excel. So let me make sure I've got everything dialed in here. Great. There's a question here to show what the Excel spreadsheet looks like. So I will do that here. I might have to do a little bit of screen share adjustment to do it. But I click the button, it's downloaded, and presumably you can't see that yet. So let me adjust my screen share. Okay. Does that look good? Are you able to see that? I hope. The spreadsheet will look really similar to the PDF in terms of the list. It's an ideal solution if you want it to be editable, if you want to make some changes. If Wholesome gets you 95% of the way there, but you still want to add things manually or adjust things manually, the spreadsheet's a great option for that. And you'll see it here. You can adjust what columns show up in the spreadsheet from the settings, which I can show you later if you're interested. It will show up first sorted by store and second by department. If you're good with Excel, you can change that and adjust it. You'll also notice that at the bottom, it'll break out the list into each day. So this is the total list of ingredients I need for the entire group. This is the list that I need on March 10th, on March 11th, and on March 12th, and so on. So if that's helpful for packing purposes or for shopping purposes, you can break those down in that way as well. Yeah. Any other questions? particularly related to dietary restrictions and exports. Otherwise, I've got a few other tricks I can show you, and share my screen and get back to the internet there. Okay. Chat window open again. No other questions? Last call there. Otherwise, I can add a few more bells and whistles here, and we can make some time at the end and wrap up early if there's not too many. And I'll jump into some of those other settings. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about was, I've kind of mentioned this a few times, but the idea that was early on when we started Wholesome was to build it in such a way that you could sort of define the level of complexity. You know, most technological solutions exist on some spectrum between wildly complicated and nearly perfect, and really, really simple and often imperfect. And you sort of have to choose where you want to exist in that spectrum. And as you use Wholesome, we tried to build it in a way that you can kind of add complexity where you want it and remove it where you don't. And that adding and removing happens in settings. And so I did want to take a few minutes to highlight a few of these that are likely valuable to more of you, and then to breeze past a few of them that you may not be as interested in. So starting at the top here, you can adjust the settings and the export settings. That means what columns are visible in the PDF and Excel. You can adjust what the meal names are: breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack. You can, as I mentioned, adjust the dietary restrictions present. I showed you the substitute ingredients. If any of you are interested, we can talk about ingredient rounding. You may have seen some like funny numbers in there where you needed 8.4 loaves of bread. You can set different rounding rules if that's helpful for you, if you need that precision. I'll jump back to export customization in a second. Packing notes is particularly helpful for rafting outfitters that have very specific locations where they might pack their food. Several outfitters have used that effectively. Batch recipes, it takes a little bit of learning to figure this one out, but this is used for organizations that particularly are using Dutch oven recipes or big desserts like cakes, where scaling linearly, meaning like with every additional individual that gets bigger and bigger, it doesn't make sense. Batch recipes allow you to scale by batch. So we cook 1 Dutch oven for 10 people and 2 for anything more than that. If anyone wants me to dive into that, I can. Otherwise, I'll leave it there. And then there's different ways to plan. You can use day numbers or dates and those sorts of things as well. But I did want to come back to export customization. So let me do that one quickly, and then we'll pause again for questions, and I can go over sort of pricing options, and we can discuss other various components. So export customization is one that adds quite a bit of power to the system if you decide to use it. And it shows up in a few ways. So let me jump back to our meal plan quickly. And you'll notice that instead of a PDF and Excel button up here, we get this export meal plan button and a few additional options. So it's really just a reporting tool. It allows you to say, just show me the ingredients from Costco, or just show me the ingredients from Costco in the dairy section. Or I don't need the calendar and the recipe details. I just want to see the shopping list. And you can really refine the reporting. Similarly, if you've got a longer group coming and you want to do the shopping in multiple sections, you can just look at specific dates of that group, so that you don't have to report the whole group's meal plan into one shopping list. You can break it down into multiple ones. So that's one advantage of the export customization. It just gives you more reporting power. And the other one is this export list button. So again, I'm looking at the list of all of my meal plans coming up. And for some organizations, they've got their group going out and they go shop for that group, and that's it. And if they've got a second group going out the same day, they do 2 shopping trips. They keep them completely separate. And if that's the case, that's great. You're ready to go with those PDFs and spreadsheets. In many cases, however, organizations say, okay, I've got 4 groups coming up and I need to shop for all of them right now. This export list button can be really helpful. And what we'll do is just check off the groups coming up that we want to shop for. You can still report based on store and and department, and then we can look at the shopping list that's aggregated for these 4 different different meal plans. So this is the shopping list that we would need for all 4 of those. And then when it comes time to either break apart those ingredients or pack, you can look at the individual meal plan. This can also be used for a pre-season planning tool. So if you know, let's just talk about this one that we just made. Maybe you built this as a template, and you know that during the season you're going to have 15 of these. You can say, I'm going to have 15 of these. Oops. And and then pull the report for that. It'll give you the full quantity that you might need for the whole season. And maybe you could just look at bulk ingredients so that you're ordering pre-season if you're going to keep it on hand. So that's a way that you could sort of streamline your pre-season planning as well. Yeah, so that's most of what I talked about in settings. If there's any of these that you want to dive into now, I don't want to waste everyone's time going through each one of these, but if there's any that you want to dive into in more detail, let me know and I'm happy to talk about it. One final one that I wanted to talk about was this multiple users. So we'll talk about pricing here in just a second, but just so that you know, each license can be shared across the whole organization. So there's no need to sign up for multiple users. Even if you're going to have multiple people logging in, you can just share the login credentials. But if you would like to have separate login credentials, you can through multiple users here. But it's really a tool to restrict access. So in some organizations, they have their cooks or their instructors or their guides or whatever it is. They want them to be able to access the meal plans, to pull the reports, to make meal plans, but they don't want them to be deleting recipes. If you spend a lot of time setting those recipes up, you don't want people editing them and changing them. So you can create a login that just has, create, edit, and delete access to meal plans, for example. And that can be a way to sort of restrict access to some individuals and make sure that the data stays in good shape in there. So that's the overall summary of the settings. And maybe we can pause there and see if there are any additional questions. And if not, I'll jump into pricing in just a second. And again, you're welcome to type it into the chat window if you'd like, or you can unmute and ask it if you have a question. Okay, no worries. Hopefully it's all crystal clear, even though I've been going a mile a minute, I'm sure. So let's just talk pricing really quickly. There are a few options to choose from here, and they range from $29 per month to up to $59 per month, depending on whether you're at monthly or annual. So there's a monthly or annual option for each of these. A lot of the Wholesome users have some seasonal flex in their work where they really need Wholesome during 6 months of the year, but they just don't need it the other 6 months. And if that's the case, you're always welcome to choose the monthly option. You can pause the account at any time to pause billing, and all of your recipes and meal plans will still exist in the background. And when you need access to them again, you can fire it back up, so you don't have to start from scratch each time. So just pay for the months that you need it for. If you do want to need it for a longer period of time, you'll get a lower rate by going annually. And then there are these different levels. Basic is essentially what I showed you during that first quick run through of Wholesome without any of the added features on there. And then professional is sort of what professional and enterprise is sort of a mix of what we talked through in the latter half of that demo. And so you can kind of look through this list of what you think might be appropriate for you and decide what level makes the most sense. As I mentioned, there is that code that I'll send out along with the recording of this webinar for 2 free months. If you want to take some time and get it set up and get it tested out, you're welcome to do that. And I'll stop my share here real fast and just jump back to that PowerPoint to wrap things up. Yeah, so here's the code again, in case you missed it. And then I wanted to end with a few but some time for some questions, and also to just share my contact information. If you have questions about this, if you want to schedule a private demo for your specific operations, I'm happy to do that. You're always welcome, without entering any credit card information, to sign up for the 2-week free trial at Wholesome. And then spread the word. We're a small business doing our best to help folks who are feeding groups, particularly in the outdoor world, and getting the word out there is always one of the biggest challenges that we wrestle with. So if you, whether or not you find that Wholesome's the right fit for you, please do feel free to spread the word to organizations that you think would benefit from it, and it would help us out immensely. So with that, I'll stop the demo and open it up for any questions that you have, and I can jump back in and walk through any of those settings or a rerun through what I kind of breezed past. Yeah. Looks like we got a chat. Let me open it up here. Great. Yeah. Hope it helped, Blake. Thanks for jumping on. And I'll mention too, while I'm waiting for any questions to come in, if you just sign up and decide you need a training with your team, there are these webinars, of course, that we can share that are recorded, but I'm also happy to jump on and talk with any team members or someone on our team, and can do that. Last call for any other questions. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for taking the time, and I appreciate you spending the 45 minutes with us, and I hope Wholesome works well for you. And again, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.